just wonder if you could start by telling us the significance of what we've seen happen in this latest step of the purge of China's military.
Absolutely, Paul. This is a stunning development. It is the biggest development in Chinese politics since Xi Jinping came to power and had, as we know, 3 terms of government. It's a question of sustainability of the Xi Jinping regime, whether or not he really can serve for life. Zhang Youxia, the man he has purged now, is the top general in the PLA. He's a war hero from the Vietnam front in the early 1980s. He is the most respected PLA officer with a huge network within the military. He's also the son of one of the founders of China. He is a red princeling, as they are called, with equal stature, frankly, within the party in many ways to Xi Jinping. So it may be that as he accumulated power in the military, and he did get rid of one of his opponents in the military, the first vice chairman, He Weidong, recently, it may be that Xi Jinping thought he was part of a cabal who would try and keep Xi Jinping from a 4th term in 2027.
So do you think that is what is at the core of his investigation and his removal? Or could it be that these charges have some credibility? Or which is it?
The charge of working for the CIA or leaking the secrets of China's intercontinental ballistic missile force is an old one. It came up in 2021 against the former defense minister. This is not credible. It may be used by Xi Jinping to bring down his opponent. But Xi Jinping has a paranoid personality. He thinks the CIA, Black Hand, is out to get China. He thinks the CIA is behind Hong Kong unrest, the Uyghur unrest, Tibetan unrest, the Tiananmen Square democracy movement. So it's not unusual for Xi Jinping to have these suspicions of the CIA, but I would take this one with a real grain of salt. It has the feel, if it's true, of Xi Jinping kind of throwing everything but the kitchen sink at Zhang Youxia.
Is there a risk here as well? I mean, on the one hand, you point to the possibility that Xi Jinping is doing this to shore up his own power. But then on the other hand, by removing the old guard, by removing a lot of allies, is he perhaps exposing himself?
I think that all of these purges really do hurt Xi Jinping within the party. I hear from many party members that they're uncomfortable with the power of Xi Jinping, and they're uncomfortable with his mercurial ways. He has not only purged in the military, but huge purges in with the party, businessmen. I think for many, even in the party, this has gone too far. I think that there are real questions about whether the party wants him to stay after 2027. So yes, I think there's a bit of instability here. And I think we've been too comfortable thinking that Xi Jinping is in total control of his future.
How would these changes impact the PLA's operational readiness? Because we've seen dozens of generals and other even higher-ranking officials being removed.
Absolutely, Paul. There is no question that leadership decision-making in the PLA will be affected for a long time. First of all, Xi Jinping will have to pick a whole group of successors. And it's difficult because remember that Zhang Youxia's reach within the military is huge. He's been in the military since 1980. He has a huge set of subordinates who have been loyal to him. Now, I will tell you, unfortunately, what they're going to do is they're going to sweat Zhang Youxia. They're going to get all the information they can out of him on who his subordinates are, who they find is guilty of working with him. This will take time. Xi Jinping has to replace virtually the entire Central Military Commission. It's as if in America, the whole Joint Chiefs of Staff, except one general, was replaced. So military leadership, military morale will suffer. Will the units on the Taiwan Strait still be good units? Of course. They're well trained. The Air Force knows what it's doing. The Navy knows what it's doing. But in terms of whether or not Xi Jinping would take any coercive action against Taiwan anywhere in the near future, my betting money is we're a long way from that.
So if, as you say, Zhang would now be taken away to be sweated, to be found out who his allies and supporters are, does that suggest there's more to come, that this purge isn't finished yet? And what other military leaders in China should be looking over their shoulder right now?
Well, every one of the theater military commanders would be suspected. Anybody who served with him during the time he came up, whether it's in the equipment department of the PLA or in field units of the PLA, his whole entire network. By the way, this goes beyond the network. It goes to his family, it goes to his friends, it goes to his children. When these kind of purges take place of an individual in China, it is devastating, not only to him, but to his entire family. Everybody loses. And this is very common in the Chinese system today. You are taken away and you are told, if you don't confess everything, you get an execution sentence. If you confess everything, we will give you a life sentence. And this has happened over and over again in the Xi Jinping era.
You mentioned the paranoia of Xi Jinping around activity from the CIA in China. To some degree, does this destabilization of the military fulfill the CIA's aims?
Well, I can't say that it doesn't. There would be the hope in the CIA that others who are scared of what might happen to them might come forward to offer their services to the United States. I think you know that the CIA has a program right now where they are using social media to reach out to Chinese. It may be that some officers within the PLA will see this as the opportunity to get out of the system and defect or offer their services.
Are there some other implications here as well for regional security? I mean, you mentioned readiness around the Taiwan Strait, but of course there is tension elsewhere in the region with China and its near neighbours, various overlapping maritime claims as well. But also there is frequent military-to-military contact between countries. Could this be impacted in any way?
Well, I think one place I would worry about is the South China Sea. I think in order to prove that he has still military readiness, we could see Xi Jinping taking a tougher stance, for example, with the Philippines over the disputed islands and reefs in that area, perhaps with the Vietnamese. In other words, smaller targets. I think he will also be very sensitive, he already is, to Japanese, what they are calling Japanese militarization. So I would expect Xi Jinping, to some extent, to try and show strength. It'll be interesting. I understand the British Prime Minister will land in Beijing fairly soon this week. It'll be interesting to see how Xi Jinping takes that visit. Will he want to make some arrangements with the British, for example, that might go beyond what he might want to do before this? What about the visit in April of Trump? Will he see the need to shore up the U.S. relationship? It is very early in this process. I can't answer those questions, but I think people should be thinking about them.
Yeah, let's talk about the U.S. side of this equation just before we wrap things up. Are you at all concerned about how the U.S. has been alienating many of its close allies recently, and to what degree does that further China's aims?
I'm very concerned about that. I think that the United States has the allies as the best defense against China in the region. China has no allies in the region other than North Korea. We have, over the years, and I participated in this, worked very hard to build relationships with the South Koreans, the Japanese, the Philippines, Australia, Singapore, and others. And I fear that the way that Trump, frankly, callously diminishes these relationships is a real problem. I think it will do lasting damage. I only hope that we can recover from this with our allies. But certainly, if I'm an ally in East Asia, I'm wondering about the staying power of the United States and whether indeed the United States will pull back a bit to its own hemisphere.